Hi everyone, welcome to Draw with Jan channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw and shade grapes using color pencils. I have used Carandache Luminance, a pack of 76 colored pencils. Please feel free to use any good quality pencils that you have, preferably one with a wide range of shades. Let's get started. I'm using burnt sienna 10% for the first layer of shading. This is just the first layer, so do not apply too much pressure while shading, since we are going to be adding multiple layers later on. I'm first shading around the edges. Always keep your pencil sharp while shading. That will help you produce a smooth effect. Pay attention to the highlights. Leave those areas blank as you're shading. Take your time to observe the reference picture and shade slowly and carefully. I am actually shading much slower than this. I have just increased the pace of the video. This is just the first layer of shading, but it really is the foundation of your drawing. It is important to get this right. If something goes wrong in this, it is definitely going to impact the subsequent layers of shading. So pay attention to the details and shade slowly and carefully. I'm almost done with the first layer of shading. I'm going to move on to the second layer, and I'm using Purplish Red for this. First, I'm shading around the edges. And I'm actually going to switch back to the first shade of color that I used for blending. You can also use a blending stump for blending. Also, it is up to you on whether you want to first complete the entire layer using the purplish red and then finally get to blending. Or you could alternate between purplish red and the first shade of color and blend it as you shade. I'm just making the outlines more visible here. And to get a darker shade of the color, I am not applying pressure, but I'm going over it multiple times to produce the darker shade. I have now switched to Scarlet for the next layer of shading. As always, finishing up the edges first, and then moving on to the inner part. Pay attention to these strokes while you're shading. I'm mostly using vertical strokes here. Just follow the direction of the strokes from your reference picture. And as always, pay attention to the highlights and leave those areas blank. Also, you would notice that a few areas have light tones compared to a few other areas where the shading is darker. Pay attention to the dark tones, the mid-tones and the light tones and shade accordingly. If you notice, I'm also creating patches in some of the areas to make the shading look realistic. Almost done with the red layer. I'm now going to just keep adding more layers using the same three colors that I used previously. I'm also going to use white for blending in the colors smoothly. You could also use a blending stump here. I'm just showing you the shading for this one grape in detail. And I'm going to switch to a time-lapse video after this. Also, this is not the final shading for this grape. Once I complete the remaining grapes, I'm going to come back to this for the finishing touches. I will be using darker shades like crimson aubergine and black for the final shading. For now, I'm just focusing on getting the basic structure right. As you're shading, try to make it as smooth as you can. You could use blending stumps, or you could use a lighter shade or white for blending. With that, I'm switching to a time-lapse video for the rest of the grapes. I'm just going to follow the same techniques that I explained in detail for the first one. Now moving on to shading the stem, I'm using olive yellow for the first layer of shading. Using Sanguine Russet for the next layer, mainly the outlines. And for the darker shades, I'm mainly using dark English green and black. There are tiny nuances here, so pay attention to the reference picture and shade carefully. For blending, you could use the lighter shade like olive yellow for blending in the colors. Now moving on to the final layer of shading for the grapes. I'm mainly working on the dark tones in this layer of shading. I'm mostly using crimson aubergine and black for the dark tones. You would also notice some portions of grey, for which I'm using violet grey. As I'm working on the dark tones, I'm also using mid-tones like red to blend in the colors smoothly. I'm just going to repeat the same technique for the rest of the grapes. Now moving on to the reflection. Shadow or reflection is what really brings an object to life in a drawing, and it is really important to get this right if you want to produce a realistic output. For the reflection, I'm going to use the same colors that I used for shading the grape. I'm mainly using violet grey, scarlet and purplish red for the shading. For the darker tones, I'm using crimson aubergine and black, and I'm using white for blending. Here again, you can use a blending stump instead of white for blending. Finally, I'm going to add some finishing touches to the drawing. Always spend those extra few minutes adding finishing touches to your painting because that's what is going to make it look as realistic as possible. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more drawing videos. Thank you and see you again soon.